The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time went through many changes. At one point, Miyamoto mentions 2 different versions of the game in development at the same time. One designed specifically for a cartridge, and the other designed specifically for the disk drive, both taking full advantages of the abilities provided by both systems. The earliest version would have taken place entirely inside a castle, like Super Mario 64. Another had only Adult Link and absolutely no time travel. And several other versions with different stories, dungeons, weapons, and more also existed. Using screenshots, early gameplay, interviews, the Giga Leaks, and an official beta version of the game from over a year before release, we are going to explain some of the dungeons, items, weapons, and magic abilities that were changed or cut from the game. We also have another video coming out that is listing all of the story differences, such as Ganondorf being a good guy for half or most of the game. Yes, that's right, Ganondorf a good guy. And several other surprising changes. So please, give this video a like and subscribe so you don't miss out when that video goes live in just a few days. Forest Temple as Wind Temple. Rumors existed for a long time that the Forest Temple was actually more of a wind-based dungeon or temple, which explains why the Forest Temple's medallion didn't feature a leaf or tree, but a fan. This is also why the Forest Temple segment in Ganon's castle, thought to be from an earlier stage of the game, featured a lot of wind-based puzzles and not a single forest theme. In Twilight Princess, the Forest Temple also contains mostly wind-related puzzles, and the weapon you receive is the Gale Boomerang, which blows the wind so fast when it's thrown that it causes a small tornado. We also know the Forest or Wind Medallion would have been a usable item with the same power as Farore's Wind. It is also believed by some fans, since equipping the Fire Medallion would give you Din's Fire, and equipping it to an arrow would give you Fire Arrows, equipping the Wind Medallion to your arrows would have a strong gust of wind follow the arrow, similar to the Gale Boomerang, which would blow the enemy back or be used for specific puzzles. Maybe stopping a fan from blowing or causing a fan to turn, similar to the fans you turn with the Gale Boomerang or even the Gust Bellow. A bonus fact, it is believed that most of the wind-based puzzles from the original temple went on to be used in the Forest Dungeon of Majora's Mask and Twilight Princess, as we mentioned earlier. Dodonos Cavern. The original Dodonos Cavern was completely different. Even the entrance looks nothing like the final game. We only have a few screenshots from an early version of the beta. Fans originally thought this was a dungeon based on Turtle Rock, due to the entrance of the dungeon. However, these screenshots were all released around the same time, which also shows redesigned Dodonos. Also, the concept of the entrance for this dungeon still exists, but in a slightly different way. It was just changed to more closely match the new design of the Dodonos, and moved to the inside of the dungeon, as well as being made a lot larger. A second version of Dodonos Cavern also existed that was closer to the final version. However, we also only see Adult Link in this version. We actually don't just have early screenshots, but a playable version of this dungeon from the beta find.
Saved Navi inside the Deku Tree. Instead of Navi waking you up, an early version of the story stated that Link would be walking through the forest and discover a monster had injured the Deku Tree. Link would enter the tree to defeat the monster and find Navi wounded inside. Navi was also apparently playable by equipping the Soul, or now known as the Spirit, Medallion. She could also apparently heal you, help you find items, and help defeat certain enemies. 2 dungeon items in each dungeon. It is normal Zelda tradition for each dungeon to have a weapon or item unique to puzzles and enemies found within it. With the original Ocarina of Time, we know the medallions were equipable and could be used as spells or equipped with arrows, so you would use the Fire Medallion for both Din's Fire and Fire Arrows. We still get the medallions after beating a dungeon in the final game, but they have no real use. Instead of being able to use them, the game removes over half of the abilities they would give us and only uses 3 spells and 3 arrows. Imagine playing the original version and not only receiving a new weapon inside the dungeon, but a new magic spell after defeating the boss. Not only that, but each spell can be used on its own or combined with an arrow. Since the final game only really makes use of fire arrows, imagine all of the potential puzzles, dungeon concepts, or boss fights that were removed or changed due to the spell or magic arrow not being in the game.
Temple of Time or Temple of Light. With no child Link, we have no time travel. So the Temple of Time wouldn't let you travel through time. So what was its original purpose? Well, let's take a look at what we do know. Equipping the light medallion to an arrow would let you shoot the light arrows. The Temple of Time would still let you enter the Sacred Realm, which is not only the location of the Triforce, but the Chamber of Sages. And where in the Sacred Realm is the Chamber of Sages actually located? The Temple of Light, which was an idea reused in Twilight Princess, with its Temple of Time dungeon technically taking place not in Hyrule, but in the Sacred Realm. The Temple of Time is also the only temple that gives you a medallion without you having to do anything. Story-wise, it doesn't make sense for Ganondorf to travel all over Hyrule to curse or destroy every temple and the entire town of Hyrule, yet leave the Temple of Time in perfect, pristine condition when it is directly connected to Castletown and seconds away from the castle itself. All of these factors is why most fans believe the Temple of Time, or Temple of Light's dungeon, was cut, and a lot of its light-based puzzles were repurposed for the Spirit Temple, which we know the Spirit Temple was turned into two completely different dungeons due to Child Link being added to the game. So before Child Link, it would have only had one section, a cancelled Sky Dungeon. This is one that was only ever a rumor. No real data, screenshots, or anything exists, which is why it's only a bonus. Constant rumors persisted of a Sky Dungeon, but no confirmation or data actually exists. However, fans still believe the dungeons located in the sky in games like Twilight Princess, Skyward Sword, and Breath of the Wild are concepts that also went unused, which is what Miyamoto has said many times with unused content and dungeons being repurposed for other Zelda games. In fact, this is how they thought you would get to the actual Light Temple. But now we know the Temple of Light is more likely to have been connected to the Temple of Time, or just have been the Temple of Time. But I feel like I have to mention this because so many fans just keep talking about it, and I know the comments would be filled up by people that may have false information if I didn't at least explain this. Ice Cavern, a full dungeon. With no second version of dungeons being needed for a child Link, since adult Link was all we had, it is thought some were cut down or removed, similar to Wind Waker being famous for not having mini dungeons because 2 or 3 were turned into mini dungeons, while other dungeons and villages were completely removed despite being 100% complete, because they felt it slowed the pace of the game. One of these shortened dungeons in Ocarina of Time would have been the Ice Cavern, which many thought would have unfrozen Zora's domain, and is the reason the water medallion doesn't have a symbol for water or a raindrop on it, but instead has a symbol for snow, and when equipped to the arrows, would have shot ice arrows. Let's think about this for a second. If you are a Zora and the lake dries up, but your entire city, all of your family and friends, including the deity you worship, are frozen or missing, it would make more sense for Princess Ruto to first investigate the ice cavern located right beside her frozen home, instead of the dried up lake on the other side of Hyrule, especially since it makes more sense for the lake to be dried up due to Zora's domain being frozen, and having no water able to flow to Lake Hylia. Even the warp portal that allows water to flow directly between the two is frozen. It has been heavily speculated that Zora's domain would have been unthawed in the original Ocarina of Time, or one of its disc expansions. A full ice-themed dungeon being unused could have been repurposed for the Snowhead Temple in Majora's Mask, as Miyamoto and Aonuma have stated many times that unused ideas or dungeons from the expansions went on to be used in the following games. With the full dungeon being removed, the ice arrows were only optional, so they were placed in the optional dungeon, the Gerudo Training Grounds, which many thought consists of puzzles, rooms, and ideas that also went unused from dungeons that weren't used in the game. As in the beta, the original purpose of the Gerudo Training Ground seems to have been much more like the race with Dompe, instead of an actual mini dungeon. No hover boots. Hover boots replaced Pegasus boots, which would have completely changed the Shadow Temple, Spirit Temple, and Gerudo Desert. as well as other areas. Do you ever wish you could have beat the Running Man? Many fans speculated that 𝐼𝐧𝐬𝐿DA was meant to have the Pegasus boots, or a way for Link to finally beat the Running Man. Well, the Pegasus boots were actually meant for Zelda 64. In an interview with Nintendo, they compare the Pegasus boots to racing around on Epona. In fact, Epona didn't even exist in the game until shortly before Child Link did. In the end, the Pegasus boots were probably thought to be redundant with Hyrule and all of the other areas, drastically decreased in size, and Epona now being available. This means locations and dungeons that required the hover boots would have been designed completely different without them, and would have likely made use of the Pegasus boots. Things like crossing the desert, the Shadow Temple, and the Spirit Temple, though it would be interesting if sprinting with the Pegasus boots would make you jump further, similar to rolling into a jump. Several mystery dungeons. In early screenshots of Ocarina of Time, we see several dungeons that appear nowhere in the game. It is assumed this screenshot with the Wall Master could have been an early forest temple, but that is only based on the enemy being in the forest temple. They are also found in the Shadow Temple, but the beta version of the game has many enemies inside dungeons they aren't found in during the final game. Notice this screenshot of the Deku Tree. We also have a lot of rooms that look like it could be a castle or temple of some kind, but maybe from the early version of Zelda 64, where the entire game was meant to take place inside a castle.
Smaller changes. Dungeons like the Great Deku Tree, Water Temple, Forest Temple, and Dodonos Cavern, mentioned earlier, as well as other dungeons, all went through several changes. We can't say how many each had or what other dungeons went through what changes, but we do have actual playable versions of some of these beta dungeons. Inside the Great Deku Tree is the most complete, with windows, a giant central structure similar to the one in Snowhead Temple in Majora's Mask. The Water Temple had a completely different central tower, and we have interviews from the dungeon designers with a version made before the long shot was thought of, and only the short version of the hookshot was in the game. Would the original version with the normal hookshot be as big of a meme in the Zelda community as the final version?
That's it for now, but a lot of rumors, news, and details are slowly leaking out. So please, stay subscribed and notified, and join our Discord to make sure you stay up to date on all Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 news. And you can find our Zelda podcast, the 𝐓𝐼𝐬𝐭�ခြ, here on YouTube and on iTunes, where we have had many guests who have worked on the Zelda series, and have shared a lot of amazing stories about voice acting, such as Patricia Somerset voice acting as Zelda, Mike Drucker on Zelda's writing or translation team, coming up with the jokes in the game, stories behind the names of characters that he created. Please subscribe and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you. If you are a fan of our Zelda videos like this, Zelda Theories, our Zelda podcast, the 𝐓𝐼𝐬𝐭�ခြ on iTunes, we would all really appreciate your support at patreon.com/GameOverJesse. That and buying our t-shirts will get you and your YouTube or Twitch a shout out every week on our 𝐓𝐼𝐬𝐭𝐽gamescast. And if you send in a photo of yourself in our GameOverJesse or 𝐓𝐼𝐬𝐭𝐽gamescast t-shirt, we can use it for promotion at the end of some of our videos.